Okay, so once again, welcome to this presentation on the Independence Day commemoration of the Marshall Islands, presented by Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, of which I am a board member, and most of the people who are on are participating in one way or another, co-sponsored by our CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby Peace Corps Action Team, and the Citizen Science Climate Action Team of the Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, which Paul Thompson and I share, and to which all of you with a scientific interest, even if it's not a scientific background, are welcome and encouraged to join, and we can get you more information about how to do that later. Our co-sponsors include the Friends of Micronesia, Friends of Fiji, and 3 Veterans for Peace groups, the Golden Rule Project, about which you'll hear some more later, Chapter 161, Iowa City, and Chapter 25, the Clarence Kalin Chapter 25 in Madison, Wisconsin, Kate's home. We have a question and answer section set up, and we have a chat section set up. Please use the question and answer for content related questions and the chat for administrative questions. So if you're having some problem making Zoom work for you, use the chat box. If you have a question about the content, use the question and answer capability. Please stay muted when you're not talking, so we minimize background noise and interference. We have a lot of content. There's a good chance we'll go past the 90 minutes that are on the program. We will stay on for as long as necessary, as long as people want to stay on talking after the formal program is over. We're happy to do that. We plan to stay for you. We are recording everything. The recording has been turned off a few times. I've not been doing it. Please don't do it accidentally. We'll make the recording available later, and lots of additional material that we present, maybe only present in part here, will be available in full with an online link that we'll email all of you later. With that, I would like to do a brief introduction. I think Jack will do a more detailed introduction later, of Senator Ataji Balos. Ataji Balos is a Marshallese politician who was a member of the Congress of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands during the Trust Territory era. His activism concerning Marshall Islands United States relations included a sail-in that delayed testing of U.S. military technology, as well as advocacy for the people affected by United States nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. He attended the University of Guam and worked as a teacher early in his career. And with that, I would request Senator Ataji Balos to give us an opening prayer in Marshallese. And Keola, if you need to intervene in any way, please feel free to do that.
Thank you very much. Komoltata Ataji kwe kumorong kabalogo yenin kuncharkia. Etalot.
Yang jargi anis kami kamor le yenin kami berkoila kun misalan problem ngin. Sibare jiran to am kamor menin le ojal menigjen Cerbalin beren lo an klamani komolot amen.
Komolta Ataji.
Emet.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ataji, and thank you, Keola. So why are we, as Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, addressing this topic? From a personal point of view, I frequently ask, why does Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action exist at all? There are hundreds, if not thousands, of environmental action, climate action groups available to us. What special thing do we as Return Peace Corps volunteers bring to it? And from my personal perspective, it's I don't know of any other group that is poised as we are to address the issues of the environmental cost of war for war. And I don't know of any place in the world where preparations for war have caused as much hardship as in the Marshall Islands and other Pacific Islands due to the extent of nuclear weapons testing that has occurred in that area. So that's why we're proceeding with this. I would like to give you a brief orientation. There's quite a bit of technical material in this that I will gloss over. Those of you who are interested in the technical content can go back to it when we post it online later. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody say a little prayer to hope that this will work smoothly.
Okay, can someone give me an acknowledgement that that's working now?
Yep.
Working.
Okay, great. So Bikini-Enewetak's Heartbreak, Climate Change Driving the Atomic Afterlife, or what I call Nyan, my bomb is bigger than your bomb. There's some technical stuff in here. Everything is wrong. There's no way to do it right in the time that we have here, but it's right enough for today's purpose. I'd like to review nuclear weapons testing first by size. So you can see my cursor. This little dot here is the biggest conventional bomb compared to the Hiroshima bombing in Hiroshima, obviously, and the Trinity test in New Mexico a week or so before that. These two original nuclear bombs are shown on this scale here. This one, labeled Mike, is the first thermonuclear explosion done by the United States. It was not and done in the Marshall Islands. It was not a bomb. It was more like a building. It used liquid deuterium, heavy hydrogen, nowhere near a deliverable weapon, but a demonstration of principle. This one, Bravo, is the largest nuclear test ever done by the United States, 15 megatons. We'll have a lot to say about it because there were several mistakes involved there. The yield was 2.5 times what was expected, and the consequences of that I'll mention later. The Mike bomb used cryogenic super cold heavy hydrogen. This one used a solid material, which made the possibility of a deliverable bomb a reality. This is the largest bomb that was ever tested by the Soviet Union in Kazakhstan, 50 to 60 megatons. Could have been twice that. They replaced some of the uranium with lead because they figured if it went off at full capability, the plane that dropped it would not survive. With this one, they only gave the plane a 50% probability of surviving. So now some nuclear weapons tests by date. July and August 1945, the Trinity test in New Mexico, followed in short order by the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. The Ivy Mike, this demonstration in principle, essentially blowing up a building, nothing like a deliverable bomb, in November of 1952. The Soviet Union tested less than a year later the bomb that's called Jo-4 or RDS-6X by Soviet Union. It was about 40 times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. It was deliverable. Notice that the Soviet Union had a deliverable bomb before the United States did. The Castle Bravo test, done not quite a year after that by the US in the Marshall Islands, in Bikini, used a trick that was discovered or invented independently by the Soviet Union and the United States, replacing the liquid heavy hydrogen by lithium that was then fissioned and made the tritium where it's needed. It was deliverable in principle by an airplane. So now we both had deliverable bombs, but neither of them had been delivered. Soviet Union again demonstrated the first H-bomb drop from an airplane in November 1955. And it was again close to a year later before the US had a H-bomb that was demonstrated to actually be dropped from an airplane. So
I just want to let you know, we're kind of running out of time for this section.
Sorry, we're running out of time?
Mhm.
Okay, thanks. I'll go quickly. You can see US panic over having the USSR having a deliverable bomb before we did. It was assumed that the lithium-7 that was mixed with the lithium-6 in this test was inert. It was a mistake. Surprise, it isn't inert. The yield was 2.5 to 3 times what was expected. Accidentally, this was the biggest ever US detonation. It was useless as a test because all the instruments were destroyed by the explosion. Fallout followed. 2 islands were evacuated. A Japanese tuna fishing boat was affected. At least 1 person died. A whole bunch of Japanese fishermen were left ill. What's left now? This dome. And the little dots that you see on it are people that is not lined at the bottom. And so the tides are now moving radioactive waste back and forth between under this dome and the ocean. Now for our program. Okay, next part is a video presented by Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner, a Marshallese poet, performance artist, and I think you will enjoy this and be very quiet. Looking good to you now?
Looks good.
I'm coming to meet you. I'm coming to see you. What stories will I find? Will I find an island or a tomb? To get to this tomb, take a canoe. Take a canoe through miles of scattered sun. Swallow endless, swirling sea. Gulp down radioactive lagoon. Do not bring flowers or speeches. There will be no white stones to scatter along this grave. There will be no songs to sing. How shall we remember you? You were a whole island once. You were breadfruit trees, heavy with green globes of fruit, whispering promises of massive canoes. Crabs dusted with white sand scuttled through pandanus roots. Beneath looming coconut trees, beds of watermelons slept still, swollen with juice. And you were protected by powerful Iroj chiefs birthed from women who could swim pregnant for miles. beneath a full moon. Then you became testing ground. 9 nuclear weapons consumed you one by one by one, engulfed in an inferno of blazing heat. You became crater, an empty belly. Plutonium ground into a concrete slurry filled your hollow caverns. You became tomb. You became concrete shell. You became solidified history. Immovable. Unforgettable. You were a whole island once. Who remembers you beyond your death? Who would have us forget that you were once green globes of fruit, pandanus roots, and whispers of canoes? Who knows the stories of the life you led before? Here is a story of a turtle goddess. She gifted one of her sons, Ledao, a piece of her shell anointed with power, a leathery green fragment hollow as a piece of bark. It gave Ledao the power to transform into anything, into houses and trees, the shapes of other men, even kindling for the first fire. He almost burned us alive. I am looking for more stories. I look and I look. There must be more to this than incinerated trees, a cracked dome, a rising sea, a leaking nuclear waste with no fence. There must be more to this than a concrete shell that houses death. Here's the story of another shell, anointed with power. Ledao used it to transform into kindling for the first fire. He gave this fire to a small boy. The boy almost burned his entire village to the ground. Licks of fire leapt from skin and bones, from strands of coconut leaves. While the boy cried, Ledao laughed and laughed. This is a story of a people on fire. We pretend it is not burning all of us. Here is the story of the ways we've been tricked, the lies we've been fed. It's not poisonous anymore. Your illnesses are normal. You're fine. You're fine. My belly is a crater empty of stories and answers. Only questions. Hard as concrete. Who gave them this power? Who anointed them with the power to burn?
Oops. Okay, thank you. I hope you were as moved by that as I was. I'm now going to briefly introduce Jack Niedenthal. Jack was a returned Peace Corps. It was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Marshall Islands And as best I can tell, he never came back. He married a Marshall Islander, has 5 kids, 7 grandkids, is an author, a filmmaker, and has served in several capacities, including Minister of Health of the Marshall Islands. Probably a few more relevant things that Jack will have an opportunity to tell you about himself in the course of introducing you to the organization called Jo-Jikum, which is a youth environmental organization in the Marshall Islands. Jack, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Melly. I'm Jack Niedenthal, and I'm out here in Madro right now. If you hear little kids banging on the door, that'd be my grandkids. So that's the caveat before I start to speak. So Jo-Jikum, when you translate that, I guess some people would translate that as your home, but home is not, to me, not a good enough word for what that phrase really represents. I would say it's more like your place, because every Marshallese person is attached to a piece of land. We're in a matrilineal society here. So regardless of where your land is from, as long as it's through your mother, and sometimes you can say through your father too, but if you have Marshallese blood, but it's your place. And this Jo-Jikum is an educational organization that really is like an advocate for educating young people about some of these issues here, because this is really, you can say it's everybody's issue, but it's really a young person's issue, especially out here in the Marshalls. So it's a really nice organization because it's all younger people, like in their 20s and 30s. So and it's also has a fund that when there is environmental issues here, that they will help the families that are being displaced. They raise funds for that. So that's also what their funds are used for. It's headed by Kathy Jetnil, who just read that poem. Really an incredible person. She heads that up. And there's a lot of, you'll hear about different kinds of organizations that do this kind of work, but this is one of those organizations that really gets a lot of bang for the buck and really has a lot of influence on people here, because it is young people, and it's good to see them involved in that. So that's pretty much the introduction for Jo-Jikum, and I appreciate, I just want to recognize former Senator Ataji Balos. He was one of the people who helped the people of Bikini early in his life when they first started going back to Washington, D.C. And I'd also like to recognize Andy Downing. He's one of those many straws that kept me out here. He was one of the first person I met. He made me get really interested in the outer islands. He spoke Marshallese better than most Marshallese, so that was kind of always my goal too. And he had a lot of experience on outer islands, and I wound up spending about 6 years out there. So my early years here. So I want to recognize Andy. We out here, we used to have the highest rate of return Peace Corps volunteers out here. I think there's 4 of us left. Not so many anymore. It stopped, the Peace Corps stopped coming here in 1995. I'll stop there. I have another part later where I can explain a little bit more. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jack. I would like to mention it's in the chat box, but donations to Jo-Jikum are very much encouraged. Their website is easy to find, jojikum.org, and that's enough. You'll see the donate connection there. And I'd like to announce that Return Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action and Veterans for Peace, Chapter 161, Iowa City, thanks to Art Roche, are seeding those contributions with $700 from us together. I'd now like to introduce again Senator Ataji Balos and Keola Downing, sorry, I know Kevin Downing, who are going to give us some more background information and hopefully an update on the situation now. Keola, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll let you work together with Ataji to decide how you're going to handle this.
Komoltada, thank you very much. Ataji, kia kumarong one malog kun nanago am me koganan kwalog raining ipenaram jare. Imi na ju utaini gem.
Ako kumol moday kamoro lani ken ini embanangan ke yang nganar marongin karong ron ken abagay na labta sa nganar medin majo labta tangan pigini.
Thank you, one and all. I wanted to first give thanks to our Iroj, our King in heaven, and praise and thanks for this day that we're able to come together and be together to discuss the problems that are facing the Marshallese people. Talawat?
Charranin rar kamanengan armijin majo lechuan charran elbang lat kumpan melolok armijin majo roban melo elabtada armijin pigini jogo me rujukun chile te recem merung rol ngal lamorene wair.
Damage to our people was incredibly large and something that we will never forget. In particular, the people of Bikini, who had their homeland decimated by these tests. Etalot?
Meni merong pain ke Amerika elak kertongan majel empangan ribini ba meni dengan kejaro ain man ngan lalin.
When they came and destroyed the people in the people of Bikini, they said they were doing that in the name of saving peace for the whole planet. Etalot?
Ngan armijin Bikini ka Enewetak jagain jair chilidirim jorran rong laben udruk rich jorran wat ngan rainin rajangan mewjan nangin mejagain in pajin in paminar chilidir emijilam nak awal ben armijin majal jorran lo pajinin.
I want to just let people know that everyone in Bikini-Enewetak, Rongelap, and all the other places, including for the most part, the entire Marshall Islands, have been poisoned, and they are still facing a lot of difficulties physically in their health and well-being because of the testing. Dalawat?
Many the chuan Sharawi level up in America. Rajai Gujin Lade Rumajal Ijodam Rich Berry. And Armijin beginning of the is again rich and maroon rolling and lamor and go higher. You can retire lamor and Melelen. Jo-Jikum Anijali of ever jolok jikim. I look in Jikim Karganin Reo. Is lamor go on.
I wanted to just express that for all the people of Bikini-Enewetak and the other islands that were destroyed, this was destruction of their Lamoran, or their heritage, their land, the place of their being, like Jack was talking about. Jo-Jikum. Jikum means that piece of property that you are attached to through your mother, or in the case of a father, only for one generation. But the women in the Marshall Islands and all of the people of the Marshall Islands are aware of the fact that this was done and is a terrible mistake and responsibility on the part of the people of the United States of America. Atalwat?
em America jay gujin kesberok army rain tono dan chorren la jogo chigir chigaron yar berilu America em jogo de mi beria America ay gujin kesberok army rain beran ren jabde ma bangilu ayr meur way jogo chigir jair kokrim roban rol ngani ijaje ngan ngal roba em jair kwal ko roba yijin rejem marungin meuri.
I just want to tell everyone that this is the responsibility of the people of the United States, and they need to take care of these people, the people that they have damaged, the people who have lost their homeland. And no matter where they live, if they come to the United States or go somewhere else, wherever they are, the responsibility to take care of these people who have been so tremendously damaged lies with the United States. Etalot?
Aba ilamnat menako aur ken ka kamolun cek Nidenthal har pokkonan laban melulugin abangin elabda gijen Bikini-Enewetak mejalata ranking arwalonganir is very bad edukun melalagagi emerba kamolo leginan parwan lingakan kwal ken charanin labrar walan in majer ibarba chuan charawi alab ngana America.
This is my desire to express for all of the people who have been so badly damaged. And I wanted to also give thanks to Jack Niedenthal because he was very much a part of what was going on and knows so much about this. This terrible thing that has happened to the people of the Marshall Islands is what we are dealing with today. And I want to thank Jack for bringing out his information because he was there from the beginning forward. And we actually realize that today, no matter where Marshallese people are, the people of the United States at least owe them the courtesy and the help to make their life better because they've lost their homeland and can never return. And what you say?
Inga elik dada menalab dada ibarba America en kesbarwar mi rain tono dan chorrani jegen chigir rabayina ailengina elba raur mengo kim kemi meurjan rangan ran rejago raban meurgen ni me pop alben mengen rejadan ragel mangakel ikan ilojit rabayin redalam pagdo ilo alab ranem mga rejab ligid human week will kun fresh ako rejab marong in nur gagi arin nur gan mga kana mga Amerika kana rejidok human aling miya meron ko mi nur gagi rainin kana nur gagi.
I just want to tell everyone that the United States must continue to take care of the people that they so badly damaged. These people are still experiencing terrible things, but the worst part is that they're losing their homeland. They're losing the ability to gather breadfruit, pandanus. All of the foods that are grown on these islands are now poisonous. The fish that they pull out of the ocean for day-to-day use are gone. So the hardship for the people of the Marshall Islands, and in particular those who were directly irradiated by the test bombs, this makes their homeland no longer available to them, and they have to try to get by with what they can do after coming to the United States. Not the way it was before, where everything needed was just to walk out and get the fish, walk over to the breadfruit and pick the breadfruit. These things are all gone. And this terrible destruction that was the result of the atomic testing must be remembered and taken care of those people forever. Nanako ame ligtata. This is my words for today, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And we're done.
Thank you, Ataji, and thank you, Keola. And Keola, you got shortchanged on the introductions. I thought you were going to introduce yourself a bit. Keola was also a Peace Corps volunteer in the Marshall Islands. He unusually acquired native speaker proficiency in the language, has spent much of his career as a translator and interpreter and advocate for the Marshall Islanders, and I guess fairly late in life acquired a PhD in acupuncture and alternative medicine that he practices in Hawaii now. I hope I got that right, and if there's anything you'd like to correct or add to it, please feel free to do so.
Well, just very briefly, my role has been for more than 50 years as a Marshallese interpreter and medical interpreter and courtroom interpreter. But the real reason why I've continued on for more than 50 years doing that job is because probably the second year of my Peace Corps experience, my family that I was adopted into in Malolap, we were the people who made the fragrant oils and the breadfruit that is kept underground until it's ready to eat. We took those things to Queen Lemijua, and I became her passer, her person to be on the boat and collect her share of copra money. But at the same time, and during that period of time, she made me katamalap, which means Ka means the, Etam is your name, Yolap means in between, so it's the go-between. And as an interpreter and advocate for the Marshall Islands, it's a lifetime position, and although Queen Lemijua Nitijela is no longer with us, I still am and will to the last of my days be a Marshallese interpreter and advocate. So thank you so much for allowing me to, show my feather in my hat that I am a little bit different than the average Peace Corps volunteer having a special Marshallese title. Thank you.
Thank you, Keola. Much appreciated.
Mel, may I interrupt?
Absolutely.
I have some very exciting information for everybody. We have an anonymous donor who has upped the matching grant by $300, so that we now have $1,000 that we are asking you all here to slowly work your way towards that, or quickly work your way towards that goal, so that we can give the Jo-Jikum youth group a good amount of money to work with their communities. I'll put the donate button back in the chat box, and feel free to do that anytime. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, anonymous donor. I'd like to now introduce Sally Clark. Sally was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Marshall Islands. She had an illustrious career as a high school teacher and post-career as a clinical psychologist, doing great things. You can read more about her biography in on our webpage where the event is listed. And Sally is also responsible for bringing Keola to us and us to Keola, for which she gets extra special thanks on top of all the other thanks. And Sally, we'd like to hear from you now, your recollections, anything more you'd like to tell us about yourself. The floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I think I just want to start out by everyone taking a deep breath, because I don't know about you, but all of this was very, very intense to watch. And even though we knew so much coming in, just the quality of the presentations and just feeling the feelings, I don't know, it's just really heavy on my heart. So, yeah, so I just want to take a little bit more time and breathe. Everyone take a breath. Just release it. Okay, I hope I have something useful to share. I went in the Peace Corps and ended up in the Marshall Islands, and I knew nothing. We were not told anything about the nuclear explosions. We knew there was one on Eniwetak, but beyond that, we very seldom talked about it. There was nothing in training where they said, you know, you're going to encounter this. This is how you talk about it, how you sit with people. There was nothing. So the stories and the information we got happened during the 2 years. We heard stories about deformed babies being born. We were told about the children running out thinking it was snowing when the fallout was falling. And some of the children collected it and put it in their eyes. And luckily, some of the adults said, let's go down to the ocean and protect our skins. But they were totally unprepared. Also, there was the Navy ship that was subjected to fallout. And there was a big discussion about did the fallout happen because the military wasn't on top of things about the wind currents, or was it planned to expose those men to fallout? So over the years, I have heard stories about the men on that ship and the repercussions of that fallout. I wrote about some of my experiences in the Journal of Nuclear Scientists, so that's in the background readings. But I'm going to give you another story that wasn't in the paper that I wrote. A friend of mine started doing investigations into what happened about the wind currents and some of the other things. And he was really delving deeply into these stories because, as I said, it was pretty hush-hush. Even the locals didn't talk about it much. And he kept asking questions, and he was a journalist and writing things up and getting it published. And one day he was at a farmer's market, and a person came up to him who he didn't know, and he was told, you better stop writing about this. It's not safe for you to write about it. So again, it wasn't talked about. And it really felt like the government did not want it talked about. Let's just keep it quiet. So let's go forward in time. I'm quite a few years. I'm at a Peace Corps reunion of the Micro 8th. We were on the Marshall Islands. And at the gathering, there was a man who came and showed us a film. And at that point, I really got, and he really made it an issue, that the amount of fallout on the islands was equivalent to 1.6 Hiroshima bombs dropped every day for 12 years. 1.6 Hiroshima bombs dropped every day for 12 years. I can't imagine the impact on the people and the ocean and the radiation in the water. It's the biggest atomic catastrophe on the island, on the earth, I mean, on the planet. It's just 1.6 Hiroshima bombs dropped every day for 12 years. So, given that, this film was going to be shown on the PBS stations across the United States. And it was blocked the night before. So all that information never got out to the public. So we have things like meeting here, talking about it, and Katie Porter's resolution that's bringing it to the light in the American culture. But it has not been a part of most people's awareness. So what can we do? Well, Katie Porter made a resolution, and it's in the background information, and the letter's already written up thanks to Micro 8. And the resolution recognizes that the United States nuclear testing program and radioactive waste disposal, including not just contaminated debris from the Marshalls, but also material transported from the Nevada test site. The Nevada test site added to the radioactivity, caused irreparable material and intangible harm to the people of the Marshall Islands. We believe this harm continues to this day. Within this resolution is a call for an apology for what the United States did to the Marshallese, and to raise awareness about the need for more actions to undo this harm. U.S. Representative Katie Porter of California and Senators Mazie Hirono of Hawaii and Edward Markey of Massachusetts are spearheading this effort, which would formally apologize for the U.S. nuclear legacy of the Marshall Islands and raise public awareness of the issue. Please write or call your representatives and senators, ask them to support Joint Resolution 73 and Senate Joint Resolution 40. And again, that's in the background information. And what else maybe we can do? We can talk to our friends about this. Make it public awareness that this has happened in the Pacific Ocean. And it's affected many people's lives, the Marshallese lives. And the last thing I think we all can do, and it's just to hold the Marshallese in our hearts and that area of the Pacific Ocean that took so much trauma to its very basis of life, the fish, the birds, but most importantly, the people. So, another breath, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sally. That was terrific. I would also add that we've strategized a bit about seeking an apology. And in addition to contacting your representatives, we've thought it's very unlikely that the president will ever find it politically appropriate to apologize for what was done to the Marshall Islanders. But maybe we could get away with the vice president receiving a suggestion or a lot of suggestions saying that maybe this apology could slip out from her at some point, kind of accidentally, but it would be out. So we'd encourage you also to go to the whitehouse.gov site and make this suggestion to Kamala Harris.
Definitely.
Great, thanks a lot. think we have Jack on the program again to speak specifically about the U.S. Marshall Islands, Republic of Marshall Islands relationship, more about environment, climate impact, diseases that have hit, now new ones apparently over the last 4 years, observations, his ongoing third goal work, and an update on the compact that exists between the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the United States, its current situation, and if there's some extent to which we can provide influence to our legislators or the executive branch with respect to making that happen. Jack, you want to take it again?
Thanks, Mel. I really appreciate what the people have been saying before me, Senator Balos, and what the presentation that Mel made, and also Sally. Like her, when I came out here, I didn't even know where the Marshall Islands were. I thought they were in the Caribbean Sea. That's the first place I looked. So I came out here, and I remember seeing the description, I still have it, about the Marshall Islands, where they give you this brief description, and it said your two biggest problems, and then in capital letters, it said isolation and boredom, because I was going to an outer island. And I'll tell you, that sounded pretty good to me after 5 years of university. So I decided I was going to do something else. I was going to go to Penn State and get a PhD. And I told my parents, well, I'm going to go do this Peace Corps for a couple of years. And again, I met Keola. I think I called him Andy before. That's how we knew him when he was here. But he gave me a sense of how extraordinarily amazing outer island life is compared to what you would see in Madro, which is where I live now. It's just like a city, small city, 25,000 people. But he gave me a great appreciation for the outer islands. And I'll tell you, it really helped the Bikinians, because I went out there with a total sense of wonder. I was there for 2 years, very isolated, no airport. We get a boat every 5 months. And then after that experience, I asked for a third year, which was very unusual. A lot of my group had quit. Third year on an outer island, they had to actually bring me in to make sure I was okay. And I think they thought I was okay, so they let me stay out there a third year. And just as I was about to leave and go home, again to Penn State to go to graduate school, some Bikinians heard me speaking Marshallese in a restaurant. And they slid down on the bench and they said, hey, we really need somebody like you who can speak Marshallese and help us, deal with the U.S. government and be a go-between. And this was 1984. I mean, a long time ago. So I said, okay, one more year on Kili, where they live now. And so I went down there, and I wound up staying down there for 3 years and just having a great time fishing. But my main education down there was by these old men, like you see Ataji Balos here. They educated me. They told me stories. They just had these amazing experiences. These are all firsthand people on the Exodus telling this story. And the mayor said to me, your main job is to keep the story out there. And, as a translator, like what Andy does. And it was extremely important, because the Marshallese society is non-confrontative. They don't like confrontation. So they used me as like a battering ram, and in Congress, the United Nations, every single media outlet you could ever think of on the planet. You name it, I probably dealt with it. Translating for these old men. I went to film festivals with them. There were a couple films about bikini, Radio Bikini, and I started recording their stories when I was on Kili. I turned that into a book called For the Good of Mankind. It's on Amazon, but it's mostly their stories, their oral history, and some of my outer island stories mixed in there that are very unusual. But they gave me a great sense of what this was all about. And I hadn't really known a lot about it before, just like Sally and everybody else. It's something that's not taught in history books. It's a very embarrassing chapter of U.S. history. And what I'm supposed to be talking about is this U.S. relationship. And it's very complicated for me. Of course, I started out as an American. I now have Marshall Islands citizenship. My wife's a Bikini Islander. So that means all my kids and grandkids are Bikini Islanders. So I've been living this nuclear exodus, for my 42 years here pretty much. And I think that one thing I can tell you is that the displacement of these people, oftentimes journalists will come out here looking for cancers and things like that. And we have a lot of those. But it's really psychologically what it's done to these people. They've turned into victims. And if you ever dealt with people who have this victim mentality, it's very difficult. They expect a lot of things to be done for them. They were displaced and disadvantaged and treated horribly. You talk about a lot of this mistrust came from the United States themselves, not telling the story the right way. The biggest example I can think of that is the Bravo shot that did most of the damage out here. There were 67 tests, 23 were on Bikini, but 20 of those 23 weapons were hydrogen bombs. 75% of all the weapons tested here in the Marshalls was on Bikini, even though it was, Eniwetak had more tests at 44. And these bombs on Bikini, they all worked the right way. In other words, they exploded and they went off, and it went into the environment, but they weren't dirty bombs like what happened on Eniwetak, which is why you have that dome. And what the United States said was the Bravo shot was an accident. And they propagated that myth right up until the mid-90s. And a really good friend of mine, Giff Johnson, who wrote a book about his wife's experience getting cancer. He was married to a Marshallese, Darlene Keju Johnson. He wrote in his book, Don't Ever Whisper, which is about her. She was an incredible advocate for the people of the Marshall Islands when it came to nuclear issues. And he discovered documents after there was a release during the Clinton administration in 98 that they had been discussing this weapon as being 15 to 20 megatons, when before they thought, they were saying that the myth they were propagating was they thought it would be 3 megatons. And so when it turned out to be 15, they went, oh no, accident. And that just turned out not to be true. They knew that this weapon was going to be very, very powerful. It vaporized 3 islands, sent the ash 100,000 feet into the air, and it was described before. We call it the Day of Two Suns. That morning on March 1st, 1954, you had the sun rising in the east like it always does, and you also had a sun rising in the west. Nobody was warned. All the military people were told to go below deck and shut their hatches. No Marshallese got a warning, and it just snowed. And if you look at some of those pictures, National Geographic had some great photos of this at one time, with kids with their skin peeling off and these people with their hair falling out. It was a really terrible, terrible thing. And again, the U.S. knew the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. So when you talk about the relationship with the U.S. and the Marshall Islanders, it's a real mixed bag. And people really admire the United States here. And Lori Kesabuki, someone was saying before that the reason why, I think it was Ataji was saying, the reason why these weapons were tested was for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. Well, Lori Kesabuki, one of the people I translated for, you'll hear the anthem at the very end of this production. He wrote that in 1946 when he was in the midst of a bout of starvation. They were on Rongerik, which is really not a place made for people. It was never inhabited, but they saw it looking just like Bikini: beaches, trees, lagoon. We'll move them there, and all the fish in the lagoon were toxic. Not from radiation, but from ciguatera. So people were getting sick all the time when they ate the fish, and it was considered a demon island. They tell these myths about how the trees used to catch on fire all by themselves. It was like a form of hell, and it was inhabited by a demon. That's the way they looked at this island. So that's where they got moved. So they were quite scared to be there, and they started to starve very quickly. So Lori wrote this song, and he's one of the ones I translated for so many times. He's the dearest, sweetest, humblest old man you'd ever want to meet. And he was one of the ones who went with Ataji on the very first trip to Washington, D.C. He was mayor then and he was so overwhelmed on that trip. Ataji helped them find our attorney, Jonathan Weisskall, who went a long way in helping us get compensation. But he realized when he came back, he was not the one to be doing that. So he relinquished. For a politician to sit there and say, I don't think I'm qualified to do this, I'm going to hand it off to a younger, more educated guy. Those people don't exist anymore. I don't think some of these people just hold on to power for as long as they can. But he gave it up. And one of the things that Lori always used to say, and it used to blow news people away because they want to hear, and we had plenty of these older people when I would translate for them who were very angry with the United States, and they would just blast away. And if you watch Radio Bikini, it's a film that won an Academy Award. I think it's on, or was nominated for an Academy Award. We went there in 1988 with Keelan Bauno. That old man used to just rip into the United States. His veins would be popping from his neck and his forehead. But Lori was this guy. He said, listen, and he said this to the New York Times once when we were up on a beach on Bikini, translating. This is in the late 1980s. He said, listen, you haven't had a world war. We have done something good for mankind. What's wrong with the United States? Why can't they help us more? I mean, it was really a dramatic interview where he said we did something for mankind. There still hasn't been a nuclear war yet, thank God. But that was almost 80 years ago. So you think about that and these kind of issues we have with the U.S. Under that first compact, it was a total political settlement in the early 1980s. I remember Keola was out here working on that, helping the nuclear victims try to fight this compact of free association that took all their lawsuits out of court. That's what the RMI agreed to, the Marshall Islands. And we had a great lawsuit. They tried 3 times to get that lawsuit out of federal claims court, and they couldn't do it because at the time of the nuclear testing, we were a trust territory and we had Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. They couldn't get rid of this lawsuit until they did that first compact. So the money we got then was for past, present, future claims against the U.S. We couldn't go to court ever again. And so we had this nuclear claims tribunal settle these cases. It's in the billions of dollars now. And we really didn't get anything. I mean, there was just enough money to do the compensation and for some of the medical issues, but there's still billions of dollars of outstanding claims from Marshallese here. And they're trying to settle that in the first compact. And that's kind of what I want to, and it didn't come, they wouldn't let it even discuss it in the second. They wanted additional nuclear compensation, the second compact in the early 2000s. They wouldn't even discuss it, the US. It went right off the table. The RMI had no political footholds for that negotiation. Well, this time it's different. And the reason why I'm so conflicted, I was Secretary of Health for the last 4 years. My contract ended in April. And so I was the Secretary of Health for the entire pandemic. And I'm the only person by law that has to prevent the spread of communicable diseases. And we had this horribly vulnerable population here. We have one of the highest per capita diabetes rates in the world. Diabetes was a comorbidity for COVID. We have malnutrition here in our children that's really bad. So we saw that coming. We had already been in a state of health emergency from August of 2019, before the pandemic hit. We were in that state of health emergency for 6 months. We had 4,000 cases of dengue, almost 4,000. And when you have dengue fever, you got to monitor these people every hour on the hour if they get really sick, because if the platelet count drops, they could die. We lost a 9-year-old girl, which was one of the worst days of my when I was secretary. It was terrible. Just loss of one person. And I can remember us having a M&M review afterwards to discover why this little girl died under our care. And everyone in the room, these are all healthcare professionals. We were all crying. I mean, this was just one person dying in a hospital. You would think they see this all the time, but our goal was to make sure that nobody died. And we worked very hard for that. And so we were 6 months into this really bad outbreak of dengue fever. And at the peak of it, when we were having 60 people in our emergency room every night, which is a lot here, all of a sudden we start hearing about Wuhan, China, and this wildly contagious disease that's breaking out and killing people and causing hospitals to get overwhelmed. And we were already overwhelmed. So we said, the hell with this, we're going to close the borders. It was so radical. And it took me 7 hours, and the group I was with, these amazing group of healthcare workers I was working with at the time, really just amazing people. We all decided as a group, as a team, that we're closing the borders. We're not taking any prisoners. We're going to make this government here listen to us. That COVID battle all over the world at the time was public health versus the politicians. And in countries where the politicians won, like the United States, you had a horrible fatality rates. Well, we decided we're closing the borders. And I had people within Micronesia calling me like crazy. And I walk into the breakfast the next morning after we did close the borders, and someone said to me, how does it feel to be the most hated man in the Marshall Islands? I mean, you can't imagine what it felt like. People were calling me, the Chamber of Commerce was calling me a bumbling idiot. But within 2 weeks, when it got even worse, throughout the Pacific, really bad. Fiji got it bad. Guam got it bad. All of a sudden, everyone was closing their borders. All these Pacific countries realized because they're an island, they could close their borders. And so we were the first ones that did it. So I was really proud of that. We just would not take no for an answer. And we were very forceful throughout the entire pandemic. And that summer of 2020, and when we had our borders closed, we even shut down the Kwajalein military base. They couldn't get any of their people in there. We wouldn't let anyone in the country. I can't tell you what that was like. It was like I was fighting two countries at once in a U.S. military. That's what it felt like for us at our health center. So we got the border closed in that summer of 2020. All these Marshallese were dying in Arkansas. The consulate there, Eldon Alec, was on video. There was one time, it was one Marshallese a day. And you look at these pictures of the graveyards in Arkansas, and they'd be filled with RMI flags. It was scary. People may not remember that. And we kept that border closed so tight. People were really mad at us sometimes. We wouldn't let people back in the country for months. Finally, we figured out a way to do that. We can quarantine people and bring them back in. And we had some really amazing statistics. We were the next to the last country in the entire world to get COVID. For the entire year of 2021, when that disease peaked, we did not have one single case, not even a border case in the Marshall Islands. No other country could say that in the world. We were the only country in the world that was able to vaccinate people 6 months and above, offer them the vaccination. We had well over an 80% rate of vaccination here by the time COVID hit in 2022 in August. We only had 3 people out of 16,000 cases die in the hospital. We had 17 deaths, but 13 of those were dead on arrivals. And I'll tell you what, and this is what I'm leading up to, if you can bear with me. We had such a great reaction to that. And part of that, this whole conference that we're talking about here is the idea of what happens after the nuclear testing with climate change. Well, I'm a big believer that these diseases that we had a 38 straight month health emergency here. That's never even had, we never even had a 3-month health emergency before. 38 months. That's 3 years and 2 months of a state of health emergency. And you're the Secretary of Health. Let me tell you something. Well, I could tell you a lot. But anyway, the story here is climate change is causing these disease outbreaks. I really believe that, because we've never seen, we had a measles outbreak in the Pacific that killed 83 people in Samoa, most of them under 5 because their vaccination rates were so low. So we had to make sure everybody who came in the RMI had measles vaccination during that time. We had 2 bad cases of influenza. We had all these diseases. And to me, this, as secretary, someone who lives with Bikinians and had translated for these old men for 3 decades, over 30 years, I was like, this is not going to happen to the Marshall Islands, not on my watch. I'm Secretary of Health. I watched these people suffer, firsthand suffering from these nuclear victims, and there was no frickin' way that we were going to let that disease in here. And I was thanking God that I had this incredible group of people around me. So When I look at what the United States did for us during that pandemic, they were extraordinary. If you're an American and you're embarrassed about the nuclear testing, like I feel the same way, when it came to that pandemic, no other country on earth was better for the Pacific than the United States, unequivocally. They gave us testing before most places in the US could get testing. We were vaccinating in December of 2020. Anyone could walk in within 5 minutes and get a vaccination. Not like the US, where my mother at 88 years old had to drive 4 hours to get a vaccination. We were vaccinating everybody and everyone was cooperating. We had a great rollout with all the traditional leaders, myself, all the health leaders. We convinced people this was a good thing. I don't know how people feel about vaccines out there. I know it's somewhat controversial, but I can tell you that our fatality rate at 0.11%, the US was 10 or 11 times higher than that. There's no other country in the Pacific that was lower than us. We were the best, 0.11% fatality rate from COVID. But it's because the United States, they gave us therapeutics. By the time that disease hit, the US CDC landed on the ground to help us, and they were stunned. We had been practicing for this thing for 2 years. We had our test to treat sites rolled out. Everything was great. So the US in that category, and this is someone who spent 3 decades criticizing them over the nuclear testing. They were great. But the idea is we protected, I think, because it was just this feeling like they can't go through something like that nuclear testing again, even if it's a disease and it's not necessarily man-made. So we worked really hard with that. Now, the new compact that's coming in, I want to shift gears a little bit. This is compact 3.
I just want to jump in. We're gonna have to wrap up soon to go to the next section.
Okay, this is very brief on the compact. They just signed a bunch of documents the other day. There's 3 different ones. One is the compact's going to be 20 years long. It's going to end in 2043. It has a fiscal year procedures agreement in there that there's going to be some oversight, not enough for my money. I think they should have more oversight over this money. If you've been watching the news recently about what's happened with the Bikini Trust funds, I just think there has to be oversight at some level. If you're giving them money, you should have oversight. And lastly, there's going to be a trust fund. And what the United States is doing is very clever. They're saying, we're giving you this, they already have a $700 million trust fund, but we're giving you another $700 million. And if you want, you can use that for nuclear compensation. But we're not telling you that's what it's for, because they're afraid of opening it up for lawsuits, because that first compact said past, present, and future claims. We're not giving you anything else for nuclear, but if you want to use this $700 million for that, go ahead. So that's going to be a big political free-for-all when it comes time, when that money flows in January, because both the Congress and the Nitijela have to ratify that compact. So that can't be done here until January. So that's when that will come into being, and that's when the money will flow. But I see that as being a big, big political debate in terms of where that goes. So there's still a lot hanging out there with Compact 3, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. But anyway, I'm sorry I talked for so long, but I could talk for another half an hour, but I won't. But thank you all for listening to me and being patient with some of these explanations. Sorry I got a little emotional sometimes, but as Andy says, he has a title. I do too. I'm a husband and a grandfather. That's a title that you take seriously here, you know. So that's why I'm so hooked into this thing. And I apologize if I kind of got a little emotional there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jack. We appreciate both your enthusiasm and the wealth of knowledge that you bring to this. This is really, I think, an education for me, and I think an education for all of us. I'd now like to introduce Art Roche, who is here representing Veterans for Peace. We mentioned previously 3 different parts of the organization, including the Golden Warrior Project. Art is a conscientious objector, not a veteran, but the veterans recognize that as having sufficient status to be a participant in their organization, and sounds reasonable to us Peace Corps people as well. So Art, please tell us about yourself, Veterans for Peace, and anything else you'd like to chat about for a little while.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm going to launch right into this, but I want to one small correction. You said Golden Warrior Project. I think Golden Warriors might be the name of a football team somewhere, but this is the Golden Rule Project.
Thank you.
So that's the name of that's okay. So I'm gonna just go right in because we got a long way to go and a short time to get there, and we're gonna go all the way back to 1958. So 1958, I was 10 years old, doing goofy 10-year-old boy things in Detroit, where I grew up. My friend Mary Sampson, who lives now in Dubuque, where I live, was doing goofy 10-year-old girl things with her friends on the beach in the Marshall Islands. Suddenly it began to snow, and you've heard this story already twice, but I'm going to tell you one more time, just like Sally told you and just like Jack told you. So Mary's parents told her about snow, but she never expected to see it where she lived because it was the islands, but there it was. So she did what all the kids did, and probably what you've done. She ran around catching snowflakes on her tongue. You know where the story is going. So Mary's family lived a couple of 100 miles south of where the testing was going on, and took that particulate matter straight into Mary's Island. The fact that she's a vibrant elder in our Marshallese community in Dubuque tells you that there's a happy ending to her story, at least. She survived a few bouts with cancer and suffers from type 2 diabetes, along with about 40% of all Marshallese adults, compared to 6 or 7% of all American adults. So that was a true story about a real person that I know, that I see periodically here in Dubuque. It's one of the stories I told hundreds of times during my month as a crew member and a spokesperson for the Golden Rule during the month of February 2023. The Golden Rule is a 34-foot sailboat. I was one of 3 crew members for that month as we made our way from northern Florida past Georgia and South Carolina into North Carolina. The Golden Rule is a Veterans for Peace spokesboat, like a spokesperson or spokesmodel, if there's such a thing, educating the public about the consequences of nuclear testing, the imminent dangers of nuclear war, and the unresolved problems with nuclear energy. These are 3 of the important issues for Veterans for Peace. We spoke about we spoke from the railing of the ship docked in downtown Savannah, downtown Charleston, and in high schools, libraries, churches, public auditoriums, city parks, everywhere we could get an audience. We had people on the ground making these arrangements beforehand, before the ship got there. Many hundreds of people listened, and many told us that they were only vaguely aware of the testing that had occurred in those 12 years from 1946 to 1958. And we heard from Sally 1.6 Hiroshimas per day, every day for 12 years. So that was part of the message that we were giving people. And that was a shock to many people. They had no idea. 1 Hiroshima is plenty. So some of the people remembered news stories about the 4 Quaker sailors who tried to sail from Honolulu north into the nuclear testing zone, but were turned around by the Coast Guard, acting on the orders of the Atomic Energy Commission. And although it was worldwide daily news at the time, you can go back and look in the newspaper files to prove this point, few people remembered how those sailors had spent several months in prison in Honolulu, finally having to abandon their mission. And few people credit their heroic effort in 1958 with setting in motion the actions that led to the signing by President Kennedy of a limited test ban treaty on August 5th, 1963, the day preceding the anniversary of Hiroshima 18 years earlier. So because my leg of the Golden Rule voyage was during Black History Month, many of the people we spoke to drew parallels between the experience of the Marshallese that I was describing and the Black Americans who arrived on the Atlantic coast as slaves. That same boat had attempted to sail into the Marshall Islands, and upon which I would later become a crew member, arrived in Dubuque, Iowa, where I live, almost exactly a year ago today, as it began its Great Loop tour down the Mississippi River, through the Gulf, up the Atlantic coast, through the Great Lakes, and back down to Chicago, where it just left about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was excited because Dubuque is the home of the largest concentration of Marshall Islanders anywhere on that Great Loop that I just described. Currently estimated at about 1,400 people, our Dubuque Marshall Island population is still growing and will continue to grow for some time, we believe. Some have come directly to Dubuque from Marshall Islands, and others spent time in other U.S. locations before finally coming here. Dubuque's cold winters are matched by the warm hospitality they know they can expect when they come here. Healthcare is a major consideration for people coming here. Our award-winning community health center has dedicated programming and staff serving this community, including several Marshallese people employed as community health workers, doing language interpretation and cultural brokering. Until I told them about the Golden Rule story, most Dubuque Marshallese had no idea that this small group of volunteers had risked so much to bring the testing to an end back in 1958. The Golden Rule's arrival in Dubuque was celebrated with 2 days of music, feasting, dancing by the hundreds of Marshallese people who came to see the boat that brought peace with its beautiful red sails. And that's when I applied to join the crew. Our community of Marshall Islanders has grown from 2 people about 40 years ago in Dubuque to the very sizable present population. They all cherish their Marshallese citizenship, and most see no reason for trying to pursue U.S. citizenship. Marshallese people do not need a special permit to work, like a green card, but they do need to verify their Marshallese citizenship to potential employers. Marshallese passports and I-94 forms are to prove legal visitor status in the U.S. can both serve this purpose if they haven't been lost or mislaid. But unfortunately, until recently, I-94 forms were printed on flimsy paper, almost like tissue paper, almost like toilet paper. It didn't look anything like anything very important or official. Now the I-94 forms are online, so if they are lost, they're easier to recover. But if they're earlier ones, then they're expensive and difficult to recover. The same documents that are necessary for employment are the same ones necessary for applying for Medicaid. Marshall Islanders in the U.S. had been without Medicaid from 1994 to 2020 during the pandemic. So it was eradicated as a clerical error, supposedly, in 1994, and restored again as a kind of they slipped into the COVID restoration bill in 2020. So in both cases, it was sort of a secondary thought on the part of legislators. When Medicaid was restored in 2020, we saw a rush of Marshall Islanders applying for passports and I-94 forms in order to qualify for Medicaid. Most of the Marshallese adults in Dubuque over age 40 don't speak English. They rely on their younger family friends to interpret for them. Consequently, most older Marshallese people are not employed or employable. Younger Marshallese of working age are industrious people who are often supporting a multi-generational family. It's not uncommon for there to be a household of 12 or 15 or more people from several generations living together, sometimes sharing one cell phone, one car. Getting everyone in the household to school, to work, medical appointments takes careful scheduling and late arrivals. And those late arrivals sometimes get characterized as island time, but which Marshallese people will clearly tell you is just prioritizing. I'm told that some of the school-age Marshall Islanders, especially those born in the islands, see their time here in the U.S. as temporary. They expect to go back to the islands and continue their life there. Consequently, there have been problems with high school and junior high school students skipping classes, and this is translated into noticeably lower high school completion rates for Marshallese kids. Marshallese parents and school officials are working together to find solutions. Just about done here. Religion plays a very important role in the life of nearly every Marshallese member of our community. There are 7 churches attended by the Marshallese, including 5 with Marshallese pastors. And in fact, Mary Sampson, who I mentioned earlier, her son, Stanley, is a pastor of one of those churches. In healthcare, we found that the way to get the word out to the Marshallese community about important messages like immunization or COVID precautions was through the churches. It's complicated by the fact that only 1 in 5 pastors speaks English. The pandemic was a painful reminder, and you heard a lot from from Jack Niedenthal about the experience in the Marshall Islands. here we were hearing about that and applauding the Marshall Islands closing the borders. In fact, the Golden Rule ship was going to go to the Marshall Islands and try to recreate its historic attempt to sail into the Marshall Islands from 1958. And this was like in 2019, I believe, and got turned around by the Marshall Islands, maybe by Jack, who said, "Nope, sorry, nobody's allowed in here. We're keeping our borders clean." So it was a painful reminder for all of us about how disconnected many of the Marshallese people in our community were when it came to receiving vital information. Although the portion of our community made up of Marshallese people is a very small percentage, 1,400 out of about 90,000 in our county, the mortality rate from COVID among Marshallese was alarmingly higher, like 4 times higher than the general population. And we have much to learn about our Marshallese friends and even more to learn from them. They're happy, generous, eager to be seen as contributing members of our community. So I appreciate the chance to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Art. Like to now introduce both our Vice President, Brady Ferguson, who is going to talk about our relationship with the Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL, and following him, Dylan Hinson, who is our treasurer, who's going to talk about this fantastic letter to the editor writing project that he runs with great success, not just for Returned Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, but also for the National Peace Corps Association. So we'll start with Brady, and then when you're done, Dylan, you can go smoothly into that.
Thank you, Mel. And of course, thank you to all of you for choosing to take time today to be here with us. And of course, thank you to all the speakers. I learned a lot from your knowledge and experiences today. As Mel mentioned, I'm vice president of our organization, Returned Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action, and I'm also co-leader, along with Mike Roman, who's also here in the meeting today, of our Peace Corps Action Team, and that's a collaboration between RPCVs for Environmental Action and Citizens Climate Lobby, a national and actually an international group working to build political will for action on climate change. Now, if you feel so moved today, I want to ask you all to take action on what we've learned today. And specifically, we have an advocacy campaign that we have started to build support for the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Conversion Act. This has been proposed in our Congress, in the House of Representatives to be specific, not yet in the Senate, but it was reintroduced back on April 20th in the House by Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and she's a delegate from Washington, D.C. This legislation would direct our country to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That was the treaty mentioned at the end of Kathy Jetnil-Kijiner's poem video. And this treaty, as was mentioned, has already been signed by 122 nations. This is back in 2017, but our country has not yet signed it. So this legislation would direct our country to sign the treaty and then to redirect resources and personnel from nuclear weapons to addressing the climate crisis and also to addressing other needs such as housing and healthcare. So we, with the help of the National Peace Corps Association and Jonathan Pearson, who's also here today, we appreciate your help. We've created a click to send tool, which makes it very easy to send a message to your representative in Congress. So the link should be in the chat, but you can feel free to take a look at that right now, or if you want to wait until we're done today, that's fine too. But you click that, you put in your address, and it will pre-populate a message for you sharing reasons why you want your member of Congress to co-sponsor this legislation. Or for the 11 MOCs who have already co-sponsored it, instead you will get a thank you message to send to them. Now, if you can personalize the message and share your experience, whether as a Peace Corps volunteer or something you heard about today, or just anything or any reason why you feel like this is legislation that's important it makes a difference when people can personalize their messages. So I ask you to do that if you can, and then just click to send. So you click, it gets sent to your member of Congress by email. If you prefer, you can print it out and mail it in. And I would also ask you to share it with others who may be interested. And with that, I'll pass it to Dylan.
Awesome. Thanks, Brady. So yeah, I'm Dylan. I work with the RPCVs for EA, and specifically I lead our letter to the editor events and efforts. And the reason writing letters to the editor are important, or writing op-eds to our local media is important, is because, you know, we've been talking all day about this issue, and one way we can move our politicians forward on these issues is by putting pressure on them in the media. And so letters to the editor are a great opportunity for us as citizens to write to our local papers and get featured in the media about issues we care about. And so we tend to have a lot of success writing about climate-related, you know, issues to our local papers. I would say, you know, if you write to your local paper, if it's a small regional paper, you have about a 50-50 shot of getting your letter featured. And if you, in the letter, talk about a specific piece of legislation and call out your representatives by name, that can really put some pressure on our representatives to support that legislation and move it forward. And so that's our goal with writing these letters to the editor. We have 2 events coming up in the next month or so. To write letters to the editor specific to this topic of the denuclearization, and to support the bill that Brady shared in the chat. And so you can find links to these 2 events. I just put them in the chat. The first is on October 25th. That's a Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. Pacific. And then you have to do the math for the other time zones. And so if you join us that Wednesday, it's Wednesday this upcoming week, we're just going to work together. I'll take you through an action sheet we have to write a letter to the editor. And then hopefully by the end of the meeting, you'll have at least started your letter to the editor, and you can submit it to your local paper and try and get featured. And that can really help us move this policy forward. If you can't join us on Wednesday, October 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern, we have another event that will be occurring, I think it's Thursday, November 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern also. So you can also sign up to join us that event. It will be the same event on the same topic on nuclear weapons abolition. So feel free to join us for either of those events, and hopefully we'll get a letter featured in the local paper, and we can help move this legislation forward and get more support for abolishing nuclear weapons and helping the environment. With that, I'll pass it back to Mel, since I know we're running short on time, or over time.
So what I suggest doing, since we are a bit over time, is to go ahead and do the closing ceremony, which is the Marshallese national anthem. I think we can get both the words and the music up at the same time if you wish good luck, but we're not going to sign off. Anyone who would like to stay to address the questions that have come up, to propose questions, to answer questions, we will stay as long as you want to stay. But let me do that closing ceremony so that people who wish to leave more or less at the time we said it would be over can feel free to do that without being embarrassed about it. So let's see if I can do the screen sharing on that again. We have the words here. Great, thank you. And it's a very interesting website. I encourage you all to go to it and take a look, because there's also, in addition to the words to the national anthem, a very interesting description of the symbology in the national flag. Okay, so again, anyone who is constrained for time and would like to leave, please feel free to do so without embarrassment. But the organizers will stick around for as long as anybody wants to stick around. And I think Dylan and I together will try to manage the questions and answers. Dylan, I'm getting a little tired in the throat, so if you want to take the primary role in that, I'd be happy for you to do that.
Okay, awesome. That sounds great. Thanks, Mel. It looks like the questions in the chat have already been addressed. And yeah, if people have to get going, thank you for joining us. But if there's any other questions, yeah, feel free to put them in the chat, or even just raise your hand and we can try to call on people. Maybe raise your virtual hand using the reactions tool.
Dylan, actually, can you re-ask the questions in the Q&A just in case?
Sure, yeah, I'll ask the ones.
There's some additional words people want to say on those.
Yeah, so Paul asked, are RPCVs from the Marshall Islands area experiencing any health issues from the leftover radiation?
My guess is that Sally would be really good at responding to that, or Jack, or Andy, or Keola.
Well, I'll give it a start that yes, although I'm retired, have been retired for more than 10 years, I still interpret for people who cannot find anyone else, widows and people who are in need. And it is amazingly difficult to be Marshallese and get public health yourself. And then twice a year, for example, my one patient has a broken leg and a metal pin, and now the metal pin is cracked all the way through. And still twice a year, she has to come and prove that, yes, she still cannot do any work. So she gets $300 a month support. So there are people everywhere who are from the Marshall Islands who are still experiencing various kinds of illness, disability, and problems, not the least of which are mental problems sometimes too, because of what happened in the Marshall Islands. The answer is yes.
And specifically with respect to returned Peace Corps volunteers, do we have evidence of their having suffered from radiation or other environmental effects there?
Well, I've suffered, but it's not necessarily from radiation. I worked for 40 years with nuclear victims. So, I mean, like I touched on before, the victim mentality is very, very hard to deal with sometimes. And it's very sad, you know, it just strips people's motivations. So maybe I haven't suffered from, my thyroid doesn't work. I don't know what that came from, but I don't think it's, you know, I've been up to the Runit Dome a bunch of times. All my kids are fairly normal, I'll say, except when they were teenagers. But yeah, you still see, like Andy was saying, or Keola was saying, you still see so many illnesses, and not necessarily from returned Peace Corps volunteers here, but there's only 4 of us left. But you do see a lot of cancers and things that are, the rates are normally high for this part of the world.
Great.
You know, for the returned Peace Corps volunteers. Go ahead, Sally.
Okay, we had one member of our micro 8s. He was with his family one day, and one person had a Geiger counter, and they went up to him, and he was very much, the Geiger counter really went crazy, and nobody else in the family had that same reaction.
Wow.
So I don't think anybody's done any studies if our rate of cancer is higher than the norm or not.
You know, we don't have a lot of figures on it, but there's, what is there, about between 40 and 50 people in our micro 8 Zoom group, and we've already had over a dozen of the people who are in our group former Peace Corps volunteers from the Micro 8 in the Marshall Islands. That's only one generation of volunteers. Over a dozen have already had cancer of one or more types. That's not normal.
Yeah. Sandy Polson had his hand up for a while. Sandy, are you still there? And do you still have a question?
It was me, actually. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Skip, Sandy's husband, and I had my hand up. I didn't know if she had hers. I was going to just add that, and all these are just anecdotal examples, really. We don't have any, hard and fast studies done. But Sandy and I served as Peace Corps volunteers on Utrecht Atoll, which was one of the ones that received some of the fallout from the March 1st, 54 test. And we slept on the ground in our thatch hut there for the 2 years. And we have wondered from time to time, well, is that going to have any effect on us? And we cannot identify that it has had any effect on our health. But Sally, just to add a tiny bit to what you had said earlier, certainly you are correct in saying that the nuclear issues were not a topic on the agenda for our training in the summer of 1969. And we did not talk about that as a group at all. But before the end of our training, Sandy and I were asked, when we were asked privately and personally when they were working out the location assignments for us when we finished training, we were asked specifically if we had any concerns about going to Utrecht. And they told us about the situation, what had happened there. We were informed of the fact that Utrecht had received fallout in 54. We also learned something about that from Jim Clark, who had been a volunteer on Utrecht prior to us, and he told us something about that as well. And so I don't think anybody involved in that conversation was withholding any information from us. They were probably giving us all the information that they had, in fact. And so our experience there with the Utrecht people was that they were beginning to get tired of the annual medical exams conducted by the Atomic Energy Commission, and a little bit tired of the same old line that, no, there's nothing, we don't find anything wrong with you all. Well, the Marshallese folks would say, well, why do you need to keep coming back then? And of course, the scientists and the medical people, desire to continue to have long-term follow-up, so they know something and they might discover something later. But that was the feeling at that time. 15 and 16 years after that March 1st, 54 event, was people were getting tired of those same old answers and wanting more information.
Thanks everyone who spoke for that question. I might move on to the next question in the chat, which came a while ago, but it says, can you speak to what assistance is directed to the Bikini-Enewetak tragedy from the Compact of Free Association approved by the US and Marshalls? I'm not sure who would be best to answer that.
Well, I can answer a little bit, and I see Carol has her hand up, so maybe she has something else. Under the first compact, they created a 177, what we call Section 177. That was the section in the compact that addressed the nuclear issues. We call it the Section 177 for Atoll Health Program. We have an extra layer of health care for nuclear victims here. That came under the compact, and that's something that's funded by the U.S. Interior Department every year. So in other words, if my family, if we get sick, normally when you go to the hospital here, there's a whole rigmarole of registration and all that kind of stuff, and you got to pay $5. You can just go to this 177 Health clinic and get taken care of very quickly. They have all the same medicine, some not as many diagnostic tools, but they have that. And also under the compact, there is compensation that created trust funds. There's been in the news, Bikini has really abused theirs after the U.S. Interior Department gave them all authorization over what's a trust fund, and they just basically spent the whole thing. So we're fighting that battle right now. But under the new compact, there's $700 million that's given that can be used for nuclear compensation. Now, I'm a health person, and I'm going to probably be back within the ministry soon, I hope, because I've applied for a couple different jobs there, not as secretary. But we hope that with this new compensation, they're going to focus on healthcare. I mean, it's really extraordinary how limited our facilities are here, considering we have, like has been mentioned by the senator, former Senator Ataji Balos, most people here are impacted by those 20 hydrogen bombs that were on Bikini alone, 67 nuclear tests altogether. People are impacted by that, and we're trying to get better health care here because we feel like we deserve it after what we've done for mankind. But that's still an issue that'll be a fight among the politicians here. They may just want compensation. Everybody wants money, which I feel is kind of sad, because I'd rather see it focused on things that really long-term help people's lives. But anyway, I'm biased because I'm a healthcare person.
I think Carol Curtis has her hand up.
Yes, I've lived in the Marshalls over 30 years, beginning in 1969, and I just left the Marshalls in June of this year. And 6 of those years I spent on an outer island village on Lai Atoll specifically. But what I really wanted to mention was a couple of things. In the mid-70s, I was on a boat coming from Ujalang, where the Enewetak people had been moved to Bikini, and the Bikini people had just recently been moved back there. And they had houses had been built for them and everything. So everything looked really new and nice, but all the trees were the same size, which was really strange coming in on the boat to the lagoon, because of course they'd all been planted at the same time. You didn't see anything like that in the other atolls. But one of the really interesting things that happened was, well, 2 things actually. The AEC doctor was there at the time, and he left on the boat with us, and I had some conversations with him. And one thing he found very frustrating, being the doctor, was that all he could look for were the nuclear type of testing that they were doing, the health tests that they were doing related to the nuclear tests. He couldn't treat diabetes. He couldn't go beyond this scope. And as a doctor, that was very frustrating, to not be able to treat other ailments or give medication to other ailments. And the other thing was, there was a Peace Corps volunteer there, and I don't remember his name, but he left on the boat with us, and I was talking to him, and he had been told by Peace Corps sometime just previous to then, like I said, this was, I think, 76, it could have been 77. I don't remember the year I was on that boat. I mean, on that in Bikini. And he had been told through the Peace Corps that it showed up that cesium, I think, was showing up in the urine of the people living on Bikini. And so he was given the option of staying or not staying. And he said it was really hard, a really hard decision for him, but he opted to stay. And the Bikinian people were not moved off for at least, I think, another year. And so I've always wondered how Peace Corps, or whatever the avenue was of that information to this Peace Corps volunteer, how it came, and how Peace Corps or whoever had this information and hadn't been shared with Bikini people, or it hadn't been shared with the government officials. I really don't know. And I asked that at a conference several years ago that we had on nuclear, I think it was called Nuclear Legacy, if I remember. And no one had an answer to that, including John Weinstein, the lawyer for Bikini for many years. I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. So that was one comment. And my other comment in terms of going forward, the diet and the nutrition in the Marshall Islands and the Marshallese in the US is horrendous. And most of the chronic diseases are caused by the diet. And certainly that can aggravate aspects of maybe what might be cancer or other things related to possible nuclear contamination. And I agree with Jack, a lot of focus should be on education and health, but certainly focus on nutrition, because basically everyone eats white rice, white bread, and canned meats, or sometimes chicken and things like that, but almost no one eats vegetables. And so they have very little nutrients in their body. That is one reason I think, at least, I'm heavy into nutrition in terms of studying it, not formally, but informally. Why the Marshallese community in the United States was hit so hard with COVID, because their basic health level was so low from the beginning, even if there weren't diagnosed other diseases that they may have had. So I think a huge emphasis should be on that. The government and various organizations have been focusing on that for decades, since the 1980s. I remember radio programs talking about nutrition, and now there are vegetables available and some fruit. It's not as vast as the US, but it's better than it's ever been, ever. But still, there needs to be a tremendous amount of work done on that. And most of you probably know this if you've had atoll experience, but very few things grow successfully in atolls. So a lot of it does have to be imported, and a lot of it needs to be grown locally in special circumstances where the soil has been replenished and added on to, and so on and so forth. But nutrition is a huge factor, and it's a huge factor in terms of overall general health.
Great. Thanks, Carol, for sharing that. We might jump to a few other questions that people have put in the chat, just so we can kind of get through some of these. So another question we had, I know you talked about this earlier, Jack, to us, is Toby asks, can you tell us more about the impact of sea level rise on the islands and on the radioactive material stored under the dome?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I mentioned before, maybe not in this chat, but the dome has suddenly become something people are concerned about. And I attribute that to the great drone, the flying drone cameras that go over that dome and present such an amazing image of that place. Kathy, when she did her poem earlier, standing on that dome, it's really a remarkable impact. The thing what's happening is, you're at the sea level with that dome, and it's filled with I remember going there early on. There used to be a sign beside that dome that said, "Don't come here for 40,000 years." And there I am in my flip-flops. It's just, and people go over there, media people all the time. But it's at sea level, and the stuff is filled to the brim with horrible stuff. They know that it's seeping into the lagoon waters directly around where the dome is. They're just commissioned. I just read in the newspaper this week that commissioned the U.S. Department of Energy has commissioned a company to go in there and do a full study of what's leaching into the lagoon and everything else. This is something no one in the United States would want this in their backyard. Nobody. Yet it's just become an issue right now because, like I said, it was always bikini. That's a sexy name. It's a bathing suit. Eniwetak in the dome was just not talked about very much in all these hearings over the years. They tried, but it just didn't gain any traction. But now all of a sudden, because people are seeing this thing, and Kathy did that great poem there, suddenly it's an issue. But I really think it needs to be studied more. And the US is going to do that now. They just announced it this week. Someone just said, could you move this material? Wow, what an operation that would be. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars probably to move that material somewhere else. It's not just like getting a loader and dumping it into a boat or something. It's highly contaminated material. They'd have to dress in moon suits. If you ever look at the video clips of them actually building that dome, they look like they were on Mars or something. They had these huge lead suits out in the middle of this hot sort of a climate we have. So to move that stuff would be just a major, it'd be great if they did it, but you're talking major operation.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, Keola.
I just wanted to take a moment of time. I realize we're already past time, but one of the things that I'm very concerned about, which almost all Marshallese people do not know about, is there's two things that are very wrong with all three compacts. I'm assuming that it's still in the third one. And that is that, you know, you want to be able to, on your own, decide what kind of future you have. But in order to become a United States citizen, you have to come to America, have a baby, wait 18 years for that baby to grow up and sponsor you, and then you start your 6-year countdown towards citizenship. That's, you know, 25 years, which is more than anywhere else on the planet. Are the lawyers so much in charge of our government that they won't allow people to come here and make a new home here instead of being citizens who pay tax but can't vote? So that's very wrong. And I'm almost certain that that is still in the compact. The compact 1 and 2, and it's probably still in compact 3, also has a cute little clause that, to my knowledge, has very seldom been used, but is there. If you become indigent, if you cannot pay for housing, school, medical, then you can be considered indigent and deported back to the Marshall Islands. Deported back to the Marshall Islands that may no longer be islands, they may be underwater, you know. And the other thing that is also very important and is almost surely not in the compact is why is the United States government not issuing a solar still for making drinkable water for every household in the Marshall Islands? It doesn't take more than a plywood-sized piece of a sheet of plywood with plastic on top, and you take ocean water, put it in, it evaporates, you drain out a small amount of drinkable water, because as of about 6 or 8 years from now, all of the ground water, saltwater lens will no longer function. So people are going to start be drinking water from wells that is got a lot of salt in it, and it's going to kill them a little bit faster than they're already being killed by everything else. So sorry, I just had to throw that into the mix.
Yeah, thanks, Keola. And while you're on the line, there's a question from Brad. Who are the 4 RPCVs left in Marshall Islands?
Yeah, I can answer that. It's me, a guy named Tim Owens, who also came out with me at the same time, Carl Ingram, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's a Stanford graduate, and Al Fowler, who for a long time worked, he's been Secretary of Finance, he was Secretary of Education, I believe. Then he worked for the U.S. Interior. He was the National Telecom Authority, in charge of that for a while when it first got started up. And his last job was with the U.S. Interior Department at the U.S. Embassy here. So there's 4 of us left. And Al was like way back in the 60s. Carl was like a couple years before me in 1979, and Tim and I were 1981.
And the 5th one was Carol Curtis, who just spoke, because she was with our Micro 8 group too, and only came back in, what was it, June when you came?
Yeah, and she just left.
Awesome, thanks. There was another question from Jonathan Pearson. I know most people have left by this point, but let me just get his question out there. He had a question about, as the Marshall Islands have requested the return of Peace Corps volunteers, and there's great interest in expanding the Peace Corps service across the Pacific, what are your thoughts or recommendations would you have for the agency to prepare potential future volunteers for the particular complicated relationship they will possibly face and with their Marshallese counterparts?
Well, we lived through it, and I hope that more Peace Corps volunteers are able to go to the Marshall Islands and start building solar stills and start addressing the second nightmare, which is global sea rise.
Yeah, Peace Corps went out of here in 1995, and it was because of neglect. And that was at a time when Eastern Europe was opening up, and there was a lot of demand for Peace Corps volunteers to go there. And the RMI, the government here, wasn't even responding to requests like, what kind of volunteers would you like this year? They just didn't respond. They said, okay, you're not responding, we're out. And once Peace Corps leaves, it's very hard to get them to come back. We tried a couple times, even with government help here, but once they move out, it's they have budgets and they have plans for other countries and things like that. It's very hard to get them back here. So I don't know if they'll ever come back.
Yeah, thanks. That's it for the questions. So I'm not sure if anyone else has anything. See, Charles.
Well, if there are no more, go ahead.
If this recording could be sent to Carol and to Peace Corps, because they're not going to know about this unless we reach out and show it to them.
Sure. So, Jonathan, I'm not sure whether he's still on the line, but we certainly intend to collect the recording and any other materials associated with it, a list of the links that we visited, et cetera, to everyone who participated, for whom we have email addresses. If we don't have your email address, for example, if you didn't register for this, but just went directly to the Zoom link, we might not have contact information for you. You can put it in the chat box, or you can go to the RPCVs4EA.org website and let us know who you are and that you're interested in continuing with us. Do it there. We have a Facebook page and group. I think the group is the easier one. I think we also have some other less well-used media channels, but if you're using them, you probably know about it. So let us know who you are, and we will shortly distribute a packet that lets you continue to inform yourself, stay in touch, get involved. We certainly are always interested in more involvement.
Sorry, Mel, let me just really quickly mention that actually we do have everybody's email because you had to enter that when you got into Zoom. So there was a sign up process there. So we'll be there for everybody. It looks like, Charles, you had a question.
I'm hoping that you also save the chat, because the chat was very large. I've been trying to save it, but you know.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely send all of that with the email.
Great. Hey,
go ahead, Charles.
One thing I do want to do before we go is tell you how indebted we are to Kate, who has been very quiet through this, but none of it would have happened without her organizing it all, making sure that we had the appropriate people here for the appropriate time, and creating this marvelous script that I've been working from, and then being almost silent through all of this. But she gets a tremendous amount of credit. We all appreciate it. We all appreciate everything that she, as our president, does for the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers for Environmental Action. So
we're a team. We're definitely a team. I couldn't have done it without Dylan and Brady backing up the chat and all of the spotlight and everything else that was going on. So yeah, we're a team for sure. Charles, you have a question.
Yeah. I saw something in Google Alerts recently about water filters in the Marshall Islands. Maybe Jack can confirm this. The news was that 6,000 units had been donated to families in the Marshall Islands. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I actually know the organizers of that. They got a very inexpensive water filtering system that just can be hooked up. We even had one here at the house. You just hook it up to your faucet, and it does a really good job of cleaning out any bacteria. Fresh water is going to become an issue. We're really scared about what's coming in December and January. They're talking about the El Nino is going to be really bad out here. The weather has changed here. It's when it's hot out, it is, I'm sure you're experiencing this in the US to some degree also. When it's hot here, it is really hot, and we're already hot as it is, but it's just almost unbearable sometimes. And you also see a lot of people having to buy water. And we're not really even into the real dry period of the years. It's coming at like the end of December. We're all being warned, look out, here comes the El Nino. We have a lot of reverse osmosis here, but I don't know if it's going to be able to handle the demand. It's a little scary. Lots of rain we can deal with, but when it gets dry here, it's terrible.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Either, did we miss any that are in the